Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, Magic players. My name is DJ, and you're watching the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. Normally, I talk about Commander content, but now it is all about Singleton because there's a special event this weekend, and this is one of my favorite formats on Arena. But one thing is that Arena is designed to be free to play, and a lot of the Singleton decks, where they're saturated with rares and mythics, and so what we're going to do is break that. I'm going to start off with not any of these fancy decks. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on Forest's Might. This was a free deck that I earned by just playing Magic. And this is not a Singleton deck. You're going to notice that there's 2 ofs here, 3 of, 3 of, 2 of, all this other stuff. But I feel like mono green doesn't use as many rares as the other decks and still has this big, powerful top end that we could be really excited by. And so I'm going to take this deck and transform it into a Singleton deck with only the minimal amount of upgrades. Alright, the first thing that I'm going to do is start taking out these duplicates because remember, it is Singleton. I'm also going to go through the list and figure out which cards I'm really excited about and which cards I want to take out completely. These Mana Elves, the Llanowar Elves, the Druid of the Cowl, those are really strong. I want to keep those. Just 2/2s for 2? No, we're going to be basically playing mana dorks and value creatures at the bottom end and then ramping into big stuff later on. So again, 2 1s for 2, we don't need that. Same thing goes for these Centaur Coursers, 3 3s for 3, and these 4 3s for 4. Nah. Okay, going back down to Plummet. Plummet is actually something we're going to be looking for. We do want a tiny bit of removal, but mostly removal in the air. These Rabid Bites are going to be cut, and that's because we're going to be able to tangle with whatever on the ground we really need to, and we're just going to try and trample over whatever we need to. Titanic Growth, no, our creature's going to be big enough without pump spells. Verdant Rebirth could be kept in, but I didn't have room in my version. Blanchwood Armor, I'm going to keep it in. It's a pretty high variance card. It can just come down and make your creature huge and run away with the game. It can also be a 2-for-1 in a deck that really needs to be afraid of giving up value because we don't have so many of those rares and mythics at the top end giving us value back again. Elvish Rejuvenator is so solid. Getting a land onto the battlefield is great. This comes with a huge 10/10 Gigantosaurus and an Aggressive Mammoth to give it trample. This Vigilant Baloth in the middle though, yeah, no, I'm not about that. I want more impactful big creatures. I am going to keep Prodigious Growth in here because it can also grant trample and is really just a huge creature, and that can go on top of a Llanowar Elves or a Druid of the Cowl. Similarly to Blanchwood Armor, this could cause a potential blowout, but we'll just play it very carefully. Meteor Golem is great, and Ghalta is great. Unfortunately, this means that I have a lot more cards to put into this deck. So now we're going to start adding cards. Commons and uncommons, in my mind, are pretty free includes. I feel like a lot of people have a lot of those wild cards. And we're going to try to be really, really careful about the rares. And we're going to try to shout out a few mythics that could go in here. But really, we're not going to spend any if we don't need to. The first thing I want to do is I want to buff up this bottom low ramp category down here. And I know that there are a bunch of solid 2-drop mana dorks that could definitely fit into this deck. Drover of the Mighty is excellent. Elfhame Druid is amazing. I'm also going to include Dryad Greenseeker. This is card advantage and an easy blocker. And then going up the line, we also have Pollen Bright Druid, a brand new one from the new set, is going to be really, really good. Now I'm also going to go back and use my first rare really early, and that's on Incubation Druid. Now this is not a necessity, but I feel like I'm going to be dabbling in +1/+1 counters a little bit, and so Incubation Druid matches so well, I've decided to use my first rare on that. This uncommon Kraul Harpooner is great because it's a creature that's also essentially a plummet. I'm very excited about that. There are also a few more mana dorks that I'm going to include. One of them is kind of like a fake one, Song of Freyalise. This can turn all of my creatures into mana tappers, and I like that. And I'm also going to spend my second rare on a mana dork at the 3-drop slot, which is... There we go. Marwyn the Nurturer. I have a surprising amount of elves in this deck, and I don't really need another rare at this slot. So again, you can make cuts when it comes to the Marwyn the Nurturer or the Incubation Druid, but I'm trying to round this out to be a really powerful deck. And I did notice in my testing that sometimes if I didn't have the perfect mana dork draw, that this deck stumbled a little bit. You need to be able to get up into your big stuff faster. So I am spending some of my rares in low drop slots. And Marwyn the Nurturer synergizes with +1/+1 counters, and we have a sneaky amount of elves in this deck as well. Along with Marwyn the Nurturer, I'm going to include New Horizons with the superior dinosaur-based art, more ramp, more +1/+1 counter synergies. Along with the mana ramp and +1/+1 counters, I'm going to include Zhang Wildcrafter. This lets me turn some of my more mediocre dorks into mana ramp and synergizes with those +1/+1 strategies. If I'm going to include Zhang, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to include Mowu as well. That's just what has to happen. I want to mention one more piece of ramp, Centaur Nurturer. I've tried it. It was fine sometimes and not so good in other situations. And so I think that you could go either way. If you're cutting some of the more expensive rares, then you might want to include Centaur Nurturer instead of some of those. I'm also going to include Bloomhulk if I'm going to be going along the lines of +1/+1 counter synergies. And then now I'm right here next to Beast Whisperer. I want to talk about a few of the rare slots I'm going to use, which is based on card draw. Beast Whisperer is going to be super critical in this deck because I really need to draw cards, especially when it comes to some of those early elves in the late game. Like I draw an elf at the top, I'm going to want to be able to play it. Similarly, I've also thought about Guardian Project, and I've used it in some situations. I'm just trying to keep it really slim right here, and so I've gone with Path of Discovery instead. Path of Discovery is going to give +1/+1 counter synergies, and even though it isn't going to draw us as many cards as maybe Guardian Project might, it does synergize a little bit better with the deck. Thrashing Brontodon is really solid, and also we have some elf synergies. Reclamation Sage is going to be really good as well. Remember, if we have things like Guardian Project, which isn't in this version, but you might feel like you want to include it, or Beast Whisper, we want to make sure a lot of our disruption is on a creature. So things like Kraul Harpooner is going to be better. Same thing with, Elvish Rejuvenator over something like these other spells that aren't creatures. Okay. Now, one card that I've found to be really solid is Goreclaw, Terror of Sisma, especially good with some of the other cards that have been included in this deck, like, for example, this Gigantosaurus. So Goreclaw really matches well, giving it trample. Goreclaw also matches really well with a lot of these other big drops and some of the other stuff we might have, like Colossal Majesty. I'm going to include it, and I might think about cutting it a little bit later. So now I feel like we have the core of this deck really laid out. A lot of early ramp, we have a little bit of interaction and synergy in the middle with some card draw, but now we're really missing a lot of big top end. And this is where we might want to spend some rares, I know. So this is where it's going to hurt right here, but these are going to be our high impact cards. Okay, God Eternal Ronus could do a lot of work in this deck, but it's a mythic, and I don't think we need it. Nissa, who shakes the world, is going to be very good. Okay, especially coming down early, untapping stuff and ramping. Being able to play multiple spells off the forest doubling effect that Nissa provides is going to be really good. And this is +1/+1 counter synergies. So the lands that we turn into creatures, we can proliferate and grow over and over again. It's really solid. Then going up the list, we have Trollbred Guardian giving trample. Tendershoot Dryad has no synergy, but can take over a game so much that I've decided to include it. Going up the list, we're also going to consider something like Biogenic Upgrade. I've thought about this card, and it was really good sometimes and only a little bit good other times. So this is a budget version of a card I am going to include, which is a rare, which is this Plane-Wide Celebration. I like the idea of returning permanents to your hand. This could be a huge draw spell later on in the game. And it could also just create a massive board presence. And so I've included this, but it's certainly not a necessity. I've also considered this Hungering Hydra to be a really, really solid include at the top. I've really enjoyed it, and it especially goes well with Goreclaw and Trollbred Guardian and Aggressive Mammoth, because it can just get huge. It synergizes with +1/+1 counters, and all these things award trample as well. If we're also considering going in for trample, we could use End-Raze Forerunners as well. I've played with this quite a bit every so often. So now we're looking at one card left, and one thing that I want to mention, but it's a mythic, is Finale of Devastation. If you do have a mythic to spend, Finale of Devastation could be really good because it essentially becomes a copy of your best card. So for example, this could be a big old Tendershoot Dryad if you need it, or a Thrashing Brontodon, or all these rares that you spent, you know, your tickets on. This mythic can become a second copy of it. So that could be really good. Okay, a little bit of tech that I want to show to you that you might not be thinking about because this is Singleton, is that you can play cards that have other mana symbols in them. So Samut Tyrant Smasher, that can come in and give everything haste. But I'm particularly excited by, in Simic, Kiora, because Kiora can ramp us and gives us advantage when we play huge creatures. So now we're one card over, and actually that one card over is just fine because I feel like with all this mana ramp, we can definitely cut a land. And this right here is my 60, and you can sort of tweak it. One thing you might want to consider doing is metagaming a little bit. And because we have a huge ramp deck and not a lot of other things, you could theoretically pick up the Immortal Sun to shut off other high value Planeswalker decks, and you can skim down on your cards like, you know, your Samut and your Kiora a little bit. That could be a fun metagame. Or you could go in the other direction and do something like, hey, I have a lot of ramp, so I'm going to slow my opponents down by taxing them with God Pharaoh statue. I haven't included these specifically, but it doesn't mean that you can't use this strategy too. All right, now what I want to do is break down this deck into its separate components with you so we can figure out how successful I was, and then also what important parts there are to this deck. So when you're customizing it, you know which parts to leave in and which parts to take out. The first thing I want to look at in this ramp deck is the ramp package. Now in a normal 60 card deck, I probably have maybe 8 pieces of ramp, 4 elves and 4, I don't know, probably these Pollen Bright druids, you know, these Paradise druids would probably be good. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of a 60 card ramp deck. So I'm aiming for 8 to 10 different sources. Let's see if I got that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half, 6, 7, am I going to get there? And a half. So that's 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10. So it looks like we have 10 sources of mana ramp in this deck. That's pretty good. And then we have one really, really big source of mana ramp a little bit later. So that sounds like we have a pretty good ramp deck. Okay. Now the next thing that I want to make sure I have is a lot of really, really strong payoffs. And the number of payoffs I'm thinking about, well, it's definitely not 8. I'm actually thinking about our payoff cards to be around 4. Maybe like a play set of big cards. Or actually, a lot of times in other decks, there'll only be like 2 really big cards that are payoffs and maybe one more, you know, other card that's really strong. And I'm immediately seeing that we have a lot of really, really big casting cost cards over here. I think I'm only going to be comfortable with 6 different cards up at the top end. And it looks like I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I could definitely do with a little bit of cutting in this area. One thing to consider though is this Hungering Hydra could end up being sort of a lower drop, which could be really good. And then maybe we might consider cutting these Endrace Forerunners. I've been a little bit underwhelmed by them. Or maybe this Prodigious Growth, although that was a free rare that we got with the pre-constructed deck. So this actually would look a little bit better, and then maybe I'd saturate this 5-drop slot a little bit more. Okay, going down to the 5-drop slot, it looks really good. Tendershoot Dryad is really intense. Trollbred Guardian really is a synergistic card. It's designed to go along with all these +1/+1 counters, give our Hungering Hydra trample. You know, once we put a +1/+1 counter on Gigantosaurus, giving that trample, but, you know, it's a little bit of a weaker card. Gigantosaurus was a free rare, a 10/10. Yeah, it's crazy. And Nissa, Who Shakes the World, is going to be a really, really solid card for this deck. Okay, going down to our other package, I'm going to want at least a playset, or at least 4 to 6 cards that give us distinct card advantage in this deck. And I don't know if I quite have that. I know I have one right here with Kiora, another one with Colossal Majesty making 2, Dryad Greenseeker, that'll be 3, and then going over here we have, oh geez, Beast Whisper with 4, and Path of Discovery with 5. And that's about it. So that might be where we're running low, is just the ability to just keep maintaining our momentum by drawing more cards and churning through our deck. So yeah, that might actually be a little bit of a problem in this deck. And then finally, we want to see how many cards we have that synergize with this sort of sub-theme of +1/+1 counters. Because if it's not a high enough threshold, then why are we playing Trollbred Guardian? You know what I mean? Like, why are we playing some of these other cards? So let's see if we've reached that threshold. We have 1 with Incubation Druid, 2 with Song of Freyalise, 3 with Proliferate on Evolution Sage, 4 with Marowin, 5 with Zhang, 6 with New Horizons, 7 with Bloomhulk, 8 with Mowu, 9 with Path of Discovery, 10 with Hungering Hydra, 11 with Trollbred Guardian, 12 with Nissa, and 13 with Planewide Celebration. Okay, that actually seems strong enough. I've seen 3 playsets of cards essentially interact with one another and make a really good theme. For example, explore packages or something like that. This could definitely use a little bit more support. I'm wondering if maybe there's a few other cards that could maybe work in the middle here that deal with Proliferate or +1/+1 counters or something like that. Okay, so basically this is the process that I go through when trying to figure out if a deck is well designed or if it's good. And I think that there's definitely some holes in this deck, and they can for sure be filled with some rares and mythics, unfortunately. But for now, I've tested this version of the deck and it's very solid. It can hold its own against a bunch of different decks, and sometimes it just runs them over. So in the best case scenario, you are smashing people. And in the worst case scenario, sometimes you get buried by card advantage, and sometimes something big like a Liliana or another mythic comes down and you feel like you can't win. Okay, that's gonna happen. So just be prepared as you build this to adjust it to your metagame and adjust it to your own collection. And most importantly, get out there and play some Singleton and have a lot of fun. Alright everyone, thanks for watching this little experiment into building your own Singleton deck. I hope you liked it, and even if you don't build mono green, it might give you some ideas for how to build your version of Singleton. I am super excited about this event, and hopefully you are too. Maybe we can battle against each other in the queues. That sounds like a lot of fun. If you're interested in my deck list, I'll have one of the versions that I worked on in the description below. I also want to thank TCGplayer.com. They sponsor the entire Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. And if you click on the link in the description, that'll take you over there. And if you buy stuff, it'll help me out a lot. Actually, just watching this video helps me out. Thumbs up, subscriptions, comments, all that stuff is really a huge boost to me. Thank you so much for all of your support, and I'll see you really soon.